You're ready.
Okay, awesome.
Awesome.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Abby Esposito, and today I'm going to talk about how to edit translated text between two of my favorite languages, English and French. So before we jump into all the good stuff, I'd like to take you on our editing journey together and show you what I'm going to talk about. The very first thing I'm going to talk about is how to approach editing translated text right from the get-go. Second, I want to talk about how to use annotations and endnotes in a translated text, the way a translation editor would. And lastly, I want to talk about how to deal with the omissions and changes within a translated text. So, with the internet today, we can access nearly anything. Information has no geographical boundaries. So even though our span for all this information has increased, our language and cultural competency has not increased. From French films to Korean pop music, nearly all media is accessible. Just because our access has expanded doesn't mean our knowledge of language has not. Therefore, we use our trusty friends, Google Translate and Word Reference, to help us out. However, these pure translation tools are not effective. From idioms to colloquialisms, languages differ more than just the spelling and syntax. Relying on Google Translator to translate the text is not grasping the true meaning of anything. Translation technology is purely not enough. By exploring how editors edit translated text from English to French, this investigation will illuminate how cross-cultural and cross-language texts are handled in the publishing industry today. The first thing I want to touch on is exactly how to approach editing these translated texts. Unfortunately, many of us love to use Google Translate. And although these translators have improved over the years, these tools cannot translate the true depth or meaning of any given text, no matter if it's a piece of literature or an article. Amy Thibault from Facebook, she's a content analysis there, said that translation is functional. It's not how you build relationships or trust. Therefore, to ensure that a text's meaning, trust, and relationship will sustain with your audience, you have to use ideal care and thoughtful consideration when you're going through a translation. And whether you're editing for a French or English audience, the translation editor must translate the exact voice of a text in a way that would be flexible enough to be tailored to each audience. Be simple, straightforward, and human. Do not strip the text of its originality. That's the reason why it's being translated to begin with. To help preserve the voice and meaning in a text, an editor must be well versed in the colloquialisms and ideology of the French and English languages. For example, the French equivalent of "you're pulling my leg" means to tease someone playfully in English. The French translation of that is "mon oreille," which means also to tease someone playfully. However, its literal translation is "my eye." If "you're pulling my leg" was translated word for word into French, it would create utter confusion and disturb language clarity, and disturb your readers as well. The second thing I would like to talk about is the editor's use of annotations and endnotes within a translated text. After discussing when and why a translation editor should make a notation, the editor needs to know how and where that notation must go. There are a variety of different notes an editor can use in the margins or the endnotes, such as language notes, structural notes, organizational notes, culture notes, linguistic notes, and more. However, I want to focus on the two key notes today: linguistic notes and non-linguistic notes. Linguistic notes specifically refer to how a word or phrase has been translated. It purely deals with the language. For the one I have up here, "you're pulling my leg" translates to "mon oreille," is a linguistic note. Holbrook explains in his editing of French text that the non-linguistic notes, however, deal with the facts and supposed facts that can help the reader understand the social background or cultural views of the text. The most common non-linguistic notes in the text are those that explain cultural traditions or phenomena that an English or French reader wouldn't know from growing up in their own culture. It is also quite standard for non-linguistic notes to be mingled in with all the other notes in a translated text. To expound why annotated texts are more popular than just purely translated texts is because the annotations provide the audience an understanding, which generates a deeper takeaway for the reader. Holbrook describes that French and other modern language texts truly sell better if provided a vocabulary and cultural explanations. Most publishers now expect and often ask for this feature from their editors, and they commonly recommend that an annotated text is the complete text for any reader to reap the greatest reward from such annotated text. Well, the notations themselves should be regarded with care and wisdom in any regard to the quality of the text. For example, if you're editing an article about a news event, you probably should focus more on the language to make sure they understand word for word what's happening. However, if you're editing for a piece of literature, such as Jane Eyre, you want to make sure that your French or English readers truly grasp the cultural phenomena happening, such when Jane goes to a boarding school or when she becomes a governess. Amy Thibault, again, a former writer and content strategist for Facebook, encourages translation editors to be thoughtful about how to incorporate the voice and tone in the notation and the text as well. Thibault goes on to clarify that the reader's experience and understanding is truly connected to the cultural appropriateness of the editor's notation. Therefore, these notes have to reflect the voice of the text themselves to help the reader understand what's going on. The last thing I want to talk about is how translation editors should deal with the omissions and changes. Again, one of the numerous roles of an editor that we all know is when to know to take something out to make it sound more clear or to readjust. However, when you have a translated text in your hands, when is it going too far? As you know, each editor has his or her own limit. But where does that limit lie? Holbrook explained that the editor may sometimes garble the original text by introducing, altering, or even omitting whole chapter headings and common fails. To say whether the editor has altered the text proper is dependent on each situation and text. Now that's pretty broad and basic. Again, he's just saying it depends on each situation. I'd like to look at this further. With cultural and language variances, from slang to colloquialisms, we know that pure translation isn't enough. Therefore, the editor has to decide to change or omit something to help the reader understand, and the editor must make it clear why he's truly changing or omitting something for the publishing house to succeed as a whole. Charles Martin states in The Dark Side of Translation that omissions and changes are expected from an editor, regardless of the text. Nevertheless, translated texts are a unique breed of text for today's editors. The editor must have an open mind and increased sensitivity towards each omission. The editor has more power and influence over a translated text than a text in his or her own native tongue. Each omission must be made with a great deal of wisdom, and these editors who do not yet possess such literary wisdom should explain such omissions to his or her readers to remain ethically sound. That's a pretty powerful statement, that an editor of a translated text has more power over the text than a text in his or her own tongue. Martin suggests that the need to note omissions is dependent on each editor's individual experience and knowledge of the different cultures themselves. While this is applicable to most texts, each text is unique, and some may require more notation than others. Overall, the amount of notation truly relies on the editor. Therefore, it is extremely important for the editor to be extremely self-aware of his own cultural and language knowledge between the two texts. In conclusion, although editing, the beautiful thing we love, it can be argued it's either an art or a skill, or both. Editing is a process and a craft that cannot be approached without sincerity, drive, and authentic passion from its editor. whether it's working with a translated text or not. Language is the lifeblood of a culture and literature. Translation is a step towards cultural understanding and acceptance for all. Translated texts embody both of the phenomenon for the readers and editors. Will a French version of The Fault in Our Stars change the world? No. But each translated text is a step towards embracing diversity and cultural acceptance for both the editor and its audience. In the world today, it scares me that fear spreads faster than open-mindedness and cultural values. Translated texts provide a window for other nationalities to perceive a glimpse through the eyes of those from another culture and way of life. By partaking in the art and literature of another culture, one grows not only intellectually, but psychologically as well. It is another priceless gift cultures give to each other to cherish. Thank you. This is my works cited, and thank you for your time and attention today. Are there any questions?